Well, moving on to other news now, and let's now get you the latest from Hong Kong, where pro-democracy protests have entered the 16th straight weekend. Now, hundreds of protesters gathered at the Yuan Long MTR station protesting against the violence that happened 2 months ago at this very station. The police was deployed in heavy numbers to prevent any untoward incident at the facility. The MTR stations across the city have become a hotspot for demonstrations and have witnessed some of the most intense clashes between the police and the demonstrators. And earlier in the day, pro-democracy protesters gathered at the Tuan Mun Park. From here on, the protesters marched through Hong Kong's outlying new territories and headed towards the government offices. Many protesters were carrying an umbrella, the unofficial emblem of the protest movement, while some even carried the U.S. national flag and called upon President Trump to liberate them from the Chinese rule. The peaceful protest soon took a violent turn as the police fired tear gas in an attempt to disperse the protesters. The pro-democracy march came at the same day when pro-Beijing groups pulled down the anti-government posters from walls across Hong Kong. Dozens of Beijing supporters tore down the large mosaics of colourful notes calling for democracy and denouncing the perceived Chinese meddling in Hong Kong. The protests, which started against a controversial extradition bill, have now snowballed into a wider pro-democracy movement. And demonstrations continue despite the withdrawal of the bill, with protesters calling for greater freedom, breaking away from the one country, two systems formula. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is expected to hold her first dialogue with the public next week. And the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard has said that Tehran is ready to destroy any country that launches an attack on its territory. This after the U.S. President Donald Trump has given an approval to sending American troops to bolster Saudi Arabia's air and missile defenses after the largest ever attack on the kingdom's oil facilities, which Washington has squarely blamed on Iran. The Pentagon said the deployment would involve a moderate number of troops and would primarily be defensive in nature. The U.S. Marine General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, said the deployment would not reach thousands of forces but declined to be more specific.
In response to the Kingdom's request, the President has approved the deployment of U.S. forces, which will be defensive in nature and primarily focused on air and missile defense. We will also work to accelerate the delivery of military equipment to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE to enhance their ability to defend themselves. We think for now that would be sufficient, but that doesn't mean there could be additional deployments as needed based on the changing situation.
Now, the acting U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper called on other nations to also contribute their defensive capabilities and stand up and condemn these attacks. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia took the media on a tour of its oil facilities damaged by attacks, showing melted pipes and burnt equipment. The kingdom sees the September 14 strikes on its Kural East and Abqaiq facilities the worst attack on the Gulf oil infrastructure since Iraq's Saddam Hussein torched Kuwait's oil fields in 1991. And sanctions are also being imposed on Iran's central bank, which the U.S. says was Iran's last source of funds. Iran, however, denies involvement in the attacks. The responsibility was claimed by Yemen's Houthi movement, an Iran-aligned group fighting the Saudis in Yemen's 4-year-old conflict.